different perspective.
Welcome to Hard Knock Life, episode 205. I am Keith Chow.
Hi, I'm Dominic Ma.
Hey y'all, I'm Jamal Michelle.
Shouts out to Sean. He's got a lot of stuff going on right now, but he will be back eventually on the podcast. But I am happy to have Dominic and Jamal talking about what's Nerd Poppin in the world of pop culture and entertainment. What's going on, fellas?
I'm chilling. We finally got a title for Spider-Man. So.
Yeah, well, let's start with that. I mean, let's start in the MCU. We're going to end up in the DCEU and then end the show. But big thing, I know Jamal has been psyched about Spider-Man 3. There was this whole teasing going back and forth with Tom Holland and Zendaya. The Nerds of Color got involved. I think Laura from the account was tweeting all kinds of home puns for Spider-Man. But we got a title. What do you guys think of? What do you think No Way Home means for the Spider-Man franchise?
It's so funny. I don't think it means what the title is implying, right? Like, I feel like they wanted you to think something along the lines of Peter maybe being trapped elsewhere, like he wasn't already trapped elsewhere in another movie.
You're still on the whole Spider-Verse thing, right? With Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire.
Oh yeah, I've already died on this hill, like easily. I'm up here when that happens. I can't wait for us to have that podcast about it. But just, yeah, it's an interesting title. The thing that got me though wasn't so much the title of the movie or the actors or anything, but it's just how quickly it was memeified, and then that meme died. Like the life cycle of these memes are so, I mean, it's so short now. Like the Bernie memes from inauguration, and this, it was everywhere. So I'm mostly curious.
Dominic, what is the deal? Why did they latch onto the whole home thing to begin with? Like, I just wonder, where did that come from? Like, was Spider-Man's, as the resident longtime Spidey expert on the podcast, was that something that's associated with Spider-Man? Like, prior to these Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, that like home must be part of every single title in its canon?
Well, I think it's a sly, sideways joke in that, home is very comforting for one thing. They wanted to bring back the neighborhood cuddly aspect of Spider-Man. And also, they were clearly going for the John Hughes vibe.
Yeah. And
they were just making a shout out to John Hughes' later blockbuster franchise being the Home Alone series, which of course is, cheesy to a lot of people, but it makes that connection without calling everything, Breakfast Club Spider-Man or,
They did do that photo, right? They did that photo that one time
with the Breakfast Club-esque parody.
Which, by the way, Breakfast Club is way darker than anything the Spider-Man movies have done recently.
But Pretty in Red and Blue would have been too on the nose, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's something like that. Although that's essentially the format of those two Spider-Man movies, except with a giant vulture guy.
Do you have any insight on what No Way Home might mean? Is it trapped in a multiverse? Is he stuck in the Sam Raimi movies? What is No Way Home? Is he perhaps going to be stuck in the Sonyverse? Is this a way for Sony to say, we're going to put you in a Venom movie, even if Kevin Feige doesn't want that to happen?
Jamal, do we not think it's as simple as he gets... Look, freaking Doctor Strange shows up, he gets whisked away to some multiversal alternate dimension. There's a big problem there, and he gets stuck there. I think it might be just as simple as that. And that's the big problem. Or... I
like that. I like that, except replace Tom Holland's Peter Parker with Andrew and Tobey, and they can't get back home.
Oh,
that's what it is. They're not going to be able to go back home, so they come to like the Miles Morales bringing everyone over to,
Oh man, so many feelings from that idea.
Man,
do you think they could build a whole bunch of the next Marvel arc on a Toby and Andrew hostage crisis in another dimension? So it's like we have to save them, like we have to, we have to save Private Ryan.
That would break the internet. I really think that would just destroy social media if that were to occur.
Somehow Tom Hardy gets sucked into the universe as well, right? Like, and then Jared Leto shows up as Morbius.
Oh, Topher Grace
living in a society
comes in.
Topher Grace fights Tom Hardy for
for the real role. Oof.
Yeah.
Did we all forget Woody Harrelson as Carnage? Did we all forget that?
Oh boy.
We might have taken a little nap on that.
I did.
Speaking of homecomings and multiversal magical Marvel characters, on the most recent WandaVision, Dominic, I'm going to just say up front, this is probably my favorite show on TV right now, and I know that you and Sean, who's not here, are just haters when it comes to WandaVision. But let me ask you: did episode 8
a little bit haters?
Did it get to you finally? Did you see what Jamal and I see in the show?
I don't know. Well, I was thinking it was going to be that thing of they were watching old sitcoms back in Sokovia for a while. I just wasn't sure whether they'd come out and admit it. I mean, because that's a very real like immigrant experience thing. Like, you know, absorbing American TV, you know, as part of making the great journey over to the United States. So that resonated for sure. But I don't know. I still prefer Catherine Hahn's villain reveal in Spider-Verse. I'll just say that. I think it was a weirdly inflated version of that. It's like, oh, I am really evil, you know.
But then I wonder if she's even evil, though, right? Because I think one of the things that if there was a whole opening where it's actually the Salem witch trials, and we learned that in the Marvel verse, the Salem witch trials were witches trying other witches and not Puritans freaking out over women existing.
Yeah, no, I used the word evil advisedly. I meant the antagonist. Doc Ock was just trying to, you know, make some science happen. You know,
and exactly. Agatha just wants to know how Wanda does her magic, right?
But I really want to know what you guys thought of it, because I'm trying to be positive yet nuanced today. That's my thing. I'm trying not to just shit on things.
I loved it. Of course, just, man.
You've come full circle, because you said you didn't appreciate the first episode at all.
Right, and I was for real just going to pack it in after the first. But then I was just like, you know, I took y'all's word for it, powered through.
You took my word for it, because these
Not so much y'all's, yeah, sorry, Keith. Yeah, Keith, thank you. You turned me to a believer. You know, the feeling I got from this episode, just to simplify it as best I can, it was the feeling that I got when I watched Civil War. Not that the two have any kind of similar overlap with story, but just the feeling that I watched first, you know, the first cap, and you're like, all right. Second one, holy shit. And then you get to that peak. So I know those are a lot of other films feel that experience in the MCU, but just really right there when I finished the episode, I'm just like, okay. All right, yeah, this is the best thing.
I found it surprisingly moving, right? Like, that's the thing. What I appreciated about episode 8 more so than even the previous 7 episodes is that this really got to the heart of, to your point, Dominic. It explained the why of the first 6 or 7 episodes. Like, why is it sitcoms? Why is it, you know, Wanda dealing with her grief? Like, we kind of knew this all along, so it wasn't like a big reveal. It wasn't like a big twist ending, right? It was just kind of like confirming the things that we assumed, that like in Sokovia they were obsessed with American pop culture, and she created Vision because she's just so, you know, grief stricken that's the only way that she can process it is by living a sitcom happily ever after life with Vision. But just to see it all play out, and you know, I'm going to shout out to Connie Gibbs on Twitter, who is a Nerds of Color contributor. She was saying, and we joked about this last week, Dominic, like, what TV trope are they going to employ, you know, in episode 7 and 8? And episode 7 turned out to be the clip flashback show, right? Like, yes. They're going back through the history of WandaVision.
Like a very special episode.
Yeah.
They've already used a very special episode.
Right. But this was the previously on. That's the name of the episode. Yeah. Where they go back and fill in all the gaps. And, you know, and I made the point on Twitter in response to Connie's tweet, next week when Vision makes his way back to Wanda, that's the reunion episode. So it's still going to play out the TV tropes, even now that they're fully real world. It was all in 235
very much.
And
ironically, he's turned monochrome while the rest of the series has been colorized.
That's right. Which, shout out to West Coast Avengers, to the old school Marvel heads.
Yeah. I had to do.
Is it only 9 episodes?
It's only 9. Next week is the finale.
Whoa, really?
Yeah.
That was 8? Oh, crap.
Yeah. That's why Dominic preferred the Star Wars release pattern. If they had released episodes 4, 5, 6, and then 1, 2, 3.
I still think the whole series won't hold up on rewatch, because I think the first 1, 2, 3 ramp up is still awkward in context. But yeah, I'm totally excited to see what happens in the end.
Are we glad that it doesn't look like there's going to be a big like Mephisto reveal or anything? It just look like you said, it's just going to be straight up, Hayward's a dick, and he sends in blank Vision, and then somehow I'm sure Wanda's going to find a way to restore blank Vision with actual Vision, and that will be the ending. And it won't be because like I know a lot of people on YouTube, a lot of people on the internet are just waiting for some like big bad to show up. But I don't think I said this last week. I think the big bad is Wanda's grief, and that's how the show went. That's how I hope it ends. If it turns out like there's a big boss, that might be disappointing.
It doesn't have to be Mephisto level, right? You know, like someone had pointed out, it was Mark Bernardin had pointed out, like, you know, most MCU movies have that big reveal, like a literal, you know, Ant-Man blows up and gets big in Civil War, a Hulkbuster shows up. It means like a physically large happening that takes place. I don't think it has to happen on a TV show because it is, like you said, large enough that Wanda's grief fills that space. And Agatha, I mean, holy crap. So,
because I feel like the show, like the emotional journey is what I think I key into. And that's why I think I like this show more than a lot of people, is that I just really key into like the relationship between Vision and Wanda. Something that hasn't been developed in the movies. Like you just kind of take for granted that Vision and Wanda are a couple because you bring in some like comics prior knowledge. But like if you just look at the text like on screen, there's nothing that says Wanda and Vision should be a couple, right? Like they probably interact in the first 3 movies that they're in together for a total of like 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden they're like sneaking off in Infinity War, right? Like there's no ramp up to their relationship, and this series gives you like the why. Why are they in love? And you know, Jamal made a great point before we started recording how this puts Age of Ultron, which is typically not lauded as one of the best Marvel movies, in a whole different context, because you get to see the story behind the story.
Yeah,
we were talking about that earlier, that recontextualizing of things that initially didn't hit for people, and sure, there's even more like issue and drama behind.
Yeah, let's ignore the whole Joss Whedon of it all.
right, and but at the same time, it's it makes you think these little supplemental things, not so much little, but these supplemental projects and just the content makes you reevaluate those movies. And sure, it's still bottom, like Age of Ultron is still bottom tier compared to the other MCU titles.
But even the bad ones, right? Like it kind of gives context to like Civil War and Infinity War. Like we were saying, like if you just take the WandaVision scenes out of all of those movies, it doesn't change the movies. Like the movies are still this, except maybe Civil War, because Wanda's kind of sets off the events of the Sokovia Accords. But other than that, like her and Vision aren't a big part of that movie. What this show does is it kind of inserts you into like the gaps between the films, and you get to see how their relationship develops. Like the whole scene where Wanda and Vision are sitting in her bedroom at Avengers compound, and he explains to her like how he perceives grief. It's what this was all over Twitter. Like one of the best lines in the MCU is that like, isn't grief just love persevering? And like that's the kind of thing that hits you. Or when she's in the sword compound and she can't feel Vision, like that stuff, like callbacks to older movies, but like it has the weight of those films, and I think that's what makes the show so powerful.
Because so much time has passed too, like we literally sat with these consciously, subconsciously, it's dormant, and then suddenly, boom, the thing, someone says something, and you're like, holy crap. Those are my favorite. Like a little line or a small object or something that someone looks at, and then you're just like, oh, that was years ago.
Because I think that's what makes Easter eggs that have like an emotional resonance more powerful than just like Easter eggs for the sake of Easter eggs. You know what I mean? If you just because you stick in something that the fans will get, it's fine. But if you stick in something that the fans will get, but it also has deep emotional resonance for like the characters, that's how you do an Easter egg.
But then they can get away with something like having the Scarlet Witch show up and have someone like me who never gave a shit about, like it did not register for me. But then to see her, the character with the campy outfit, like the OG image of her, not really full, right? Like the Scarlet Witch coming down to Wanda, and I'm like, whoa, oh, holy shit, that's a Scarlet Witch. And
yeah,
I thought that was crazy.
Dominic, you're the comic scholar in the group, and especially old school Marvel.
Stop saying that, so much pressure.
Especially old school Marvel. I mean, I feel like you know more about old school Marvel than I do, but like the way that they were able to weave in such like, as Jamal said, kind of like overtly comic booky stuff like chaos magic and the actual Scarlet Witch reveal, like those types of things they kind of have avoided for the last like decade or so.
Yeah.
primarily because of maybe like Fox and legal reasons, but they're now able to finally kind of like really pull in all of the comic booky stuff. What did you think of that?
Right. I mean, first, I'm really quick. I'm just gonna say we did notice that Wanda's dad showed up in this episode.
Not Magneto.
Not Magneto. Okay, so figure that. Yeah. I mean, what's interesting about it to me is from the comics background point of view is it's all ramping up towards this difficult thing they've never been able to work out in the comics, which is that the Scarlet Witch can do anything. now, if they from Jump in Age of Ultron they'd just given her power set as she can do anything, that would have screwed up all the next 8 movies. Because you always be like, why doesn't she just like twist reality?
Which Okoye says in Infinity War, where she's like, she could do that. What's she doing up there?
Yeah. Why is she just hanging back? Because they were never sure how to open that exact Pandora's box.
Right.
Literally. Now they're sort of ramping up towards that because her probability hexes can make anything unlikely to happen, and that's pretty much is the most infinite power in the universe.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need the Infinity Gauntlet if you are the Infinity Gauntlet yourself, right?
Yeah, if it's really unlikely that you will have the powers of an Infinity Gauntlet, it will become so because it's really unlikely, and that's Wanda's weird power in a nutshell, based on the comic science, which is hard to do in movies.
But that scene with the Mind Stone that came out of the scepter. Remember when they were like in that room with her? So she didn't have powers at that point, did she have powers?
Well, I think what they were saying is that she always had powers, but maybe the Mind Stone is what unlocked them. So like everyone thought the WandaVision was going to reveal that she was going to be the first mutant in the MCU. But instead of leaning into the mutant part by not showing Magneto as her dad, they actually lean into like, no, she's not a mutant, but she's inherently magical. Like she just has the magical gene in her, and like because they what they intimated is that when the Stark bomb hit their house, it wasn't a dud.
Right? Yeah.
Stark Industries doesn't have duds. Mm-hmm. She's the one who prevented it from detonating. So
when the Scarlet Witch actually shows up, is she seeing this, or did they come out of the Mind Stone? Or?
I think to me, the way I interpret that scene is she's seeing her destiny in the Mind Stone. The experiments with the Mind Stone is what ultimately unlocked her potential and unlocked the thing inside her. But to Dom's point, up to now, she didn't even realize how powerful she was. She just thought it gave her like telekinesis and whatever. Like I think what does Colby Smulders say? He's fast and she's weird. That's the extent.
Boy, is she weird.
I thought, wow.
But she's the most useful plot device ever because she can make anything
chaos.
Happen. She can make any kind of chaos.
Make someone chaotic, and then that's it. You win whatever story. I thought she was possessed.
Yeah. She can make Tobey Maguire the most important person in the whole MCU.
Thank you, Dom.
Well, you need that to happen for some long-term plot reason.
She is in the Doctor Strange movie, Multiverse of Madness.
Isn't this supposed to segue into that? This is supposed to be...
Well, the original timeline of the MCU phase, whatever we're in, 5 now, was, WandaVision was actually not supposed to be the first TV show. Falcon and Winter Soldier was supposed to come out first. And I think the way it was timed originally was that Black Widow came out in May, then Eternals, then Falcon and Winter Soldier, and then WandaVision, and then Multiverse of Madness. Like, that was, like, the trajectory, but because of COVID, everything got, like, jumbled around. So, Doctor Strange isn't coming out for a while now. So I'm not exactly sure how the transition from this movie to that.
Oh, it's going to be strange. No pun intended.
But, the timeline is kind of like... no pun intended. The timeline is a little jumbled, though, because not only is that movie coming out not for some time, but... they kind of go back and forward in their, like, in-world timeline because, the events of this movie take place only weeks after the blip, right? So, like, in the chronology, this show takes place before Spider-Man Far From Home, like, in terms of chronology. Because Far From Home takes place several months after not the snap, but the return.
Oh man.
And then this movie takes place like immediately after the return.
When does
Monica wakes up?
But you said
they're off to.
You said Multiverse of Madness isn't coming out for a while, and then No Way Home is coming out in the summer.
The fall of 2021. Yeah, I think Multiverse of Madness comes out in the fall, and then Spider-Man comes out Christmas. There's like 7 movies coming out this year.
Oh wow!
It's crazy. It's like a whole like Falcon Winter Soldier comes out next month. I think Shang-Chi comes out in June or something. That Black Widow's still coming out. Like, it's a whole bunch of Eternals is still coming out. Like, everything's coming out in 21.
So what's the next move? The move, like, the last few phases is Thor, right, and then Infinity War and Endgame. What's the next lead up? Or like, I know there's a ton of content, but
I mean, the assumption has always been, I think, the X-Men. Like, this is all leading up to the X-Men or the Fantastic Four. But I don't know. I can't
I'm
say.
pretty sure the Spider-Man movie sets up the big problem. At least they have to at least get to the Civil War point of, this is an extreme problem that we're gonna some sort of big bad will be established by that, and then whether it's by name or just by a concept, and possibly in the Eternals, because I do want to talk about this at some point in Nerds Popping, but how there's these two movies coming out from the characters that we haven't seen before, so there has to do a whole lot of world building, like in the Marvel universe, and late part of this year before we return to Spider-Man, which is somewhat familiar territory.
Right. Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's a definitely a transition year. I mean, we talked about so many times on this podcast how, like, the MCU in itself is in a transition because of not only the end of those first few phases with the whole Infinity Saga and Thanos and everything, but, like, the departure of so many of the actors, Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr., the death of Chadwick Boseman. So, like, anything that comes after is going to be a huge shift from whatever they had intended.
Right, the pandemic, switching around stuff that you're
exactly.
Holy
so
cow.
Like, so many things are in flux with the MCU, but if anything, like, they've been able to right the ship, and they've been able to handle, like, these kinds of curveballs. The other let's say the other company has had its own share of curveballs, and we'll shift again from Marvel to DC. But this last week, there was a lot of DC news. A few things. We know that Justice League has a runtime. It's going to be 4 hours and 3 minutes long.
3 minutes.
Yeah, that extra 3 minutes is very important. Superman and Lois, the new Superman TV show, dropped this week. I thought it was a great pilot episode, but I want to talk a little bit about the controversy around that show. And then finally,
canon or not canon? Oh no, we don't care about canon.
We don't care about canon.
DC context. Sorry.
And then finally,
My bad.
Warner Brothers announced J.J. Abrams is rebooting the Superman film franchise with Ta-Nehisi Coates writing, and the assumption is it's going to be about a quote-unquote black Superman. Whether or not they reboot Clark Kent as an African-American character, or if they bring in the Calvin Ellis character, it remains to be seen. But Superman has been in the news. I want to talk a little bit about it, particularly Ray Fisher's continued beef with Walter Hamada and the entire executive branch of Warner Brothers Films. Let's start with the J.J. Abrams Ta-Nehisi Coates team up. What do we think of a potential... Well, first of all, will this movie get off the ground? Because J.J. Abrams has tried making a Superman movie before and it never happened. But what do we think of this new super dynamic duo of Ta-Nehisi Coates and J.J. Abrams?
I was wondering who's producing. Is he directing and producing it? Or?
I don't know if he's... I'm assuming he's directing it. He could be producing. I know that Ta-Nehisi was brought on to write the screenplay. But JJ has this, like, I think, like 5 or 6 picture deal at Warner Brothers. And this is part of it. So whether or not
I guess Abrams is producing, and
he's definitely producing. Whether or not he's directing, I don't know. Because we all know how, like, JJ has ups and downs in the things he directs.
I think it's super interesting. Are you guys Superman fans? I know you are, Wentz, but in the sense of, like, what would you hope for in the Superman feature?
I don't want to be mean, for it to interest me, Sure. Okay. No, I love Coates. Coates, like, just from, like, a scholarly academic and like a critical, writer. But please, Man of Steel did it for me. And funny enough, it did it for nobody else, or for a small number of people. I think that's because I just have not been DC or Superman. And so when Man of Steel dropped, I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I kept that to myself because most folks didn't think that was cool.
No, Man of Steel is cool, man.
I loved it.
I like 3/4 of it.
I just hope it interests me. That's really it. I want to like Superman as, like, such a staple character. It's like, you don't like Wonder Woman or Batman. I want to end up liking this.
Yeah, but it's easy to not like Superman fundamentally for all the usual reasons, because he's just way too overpowered. He's just this big square-jawed guy. I too am looking for the Superman story that would super interest me. I have a big fondness for Superman 2 back in the day because it had a sense of humor. God help me, I also like Superman 3 because it had sort of a sense of humor, the lightness about it. And with Man of Steel, sense of humor, not Zack Snyder's jam. cut league necessarily. but him like shooting for Zack Snyder's style, shooting a guy flying around with a big flowing red shiny cape, that's kind of him living his best life. That those things were very well composed and powerful, I think, in Man of Steel. As far as the prospect of the next Superman, for me, like I get the impression that Coates comes from a long form journalism background, and there's a reason why like journalists are the best writers, essentially, because they just basically tell a story and like try to get you interested into it. Their strength is not necessarily in like making up weird shit, which I think is something I like to see in more of his, I've read some of his comic work too. I think making up silly shit is a thing that he could expand on in his continued superhero work, but that's just my opinion.
I really do. I love that take, Dominic, especially because anytime this happens where a person of color is involved in the making or the process of what we're about to see, like especially a character like Superman, it was just a major dog whistle. In fact, when it was announced, the damn phrase "black supremacist" was trending on Twitter around the same time. Like,
are you for real?
It could, yeah, wow. It could not be more just idiotic and moronic, and it was the same, a lot of folks just like, hey man, I hope they don't make him black because of XYZ, or let's just hope he doesn't do this XYZ. It is so tough. It's like Gamergate had a child with Comic Book Gate, and every time one of these amazing headlines comes out, it turns into I hope they don't blackify this thing. Like, please shut the hell up. There's literally every version of every character and every reality. You know what I mean? So just short-winded responses like, I hope they go Calvin Ellis so people would not have to bitch about it the way they've been bitching about it in really just racist terms.
It's really interesting too, because like you see the confluence of you have the racist bigoted fans, but then you have like the DCEU stands who are like, you were talking about Man of Steel, like Henry Cavill deserves his movie, and it's like, this is them shitting on the Snyderverse, and especially this on the heels of Sasha Kelly getting cast as Supergirl in the Flash movie. She's the first Latinx actress to play Supergirl. So yeah, I think there's like a confluence, and I know that there's a lot of Snyder Cut fans who aren't racist, who aren't misogynist, but like those always seem to be the loudest voices for whatever reason, and it doesn't help that you have people who are pushing for a Henry Cavill, which for all intents and purposes, I want to see a Henry Cavill solo Superman movie too. Like, I don't think like I said, I like the first 2/3 of Man of Steel. Yep. I feel like Henry Cavill is a great Superman. I would like to see him have it like a legit chance to play Superman, because I still feel like in 3 movies he hasn't had a chance to play Superman. My favorite Superman moment was in Shazam, but that's another So yeah, I mean, I think there is that kind of like undertone to the reaction. But ironically, speaking of the Snyderverse, one of the most prominent voices coming out against the Coates J.J. Abrams team up is the Justice League actor himself, Ray Fisher, who said who kind of intimated that this is Warner Brothers laundering their racist reputation from the set of Justice League by announcing a Black Superman movie. So, like, what do we think of Ray Fisher's continued beef with the powers that be of Warner Brothers?
Man, if Ray Fisher has that deep understanding of what's going on in the DC Universe, more power to him. I don't think they've got that much of a plan. That's all I have to say.
That's true.
I do feel for him. I think it sucks, because you're not there or a part of the thing that now they recruited a black writer for. And that black writer would have been able to treat his character and be in that setting in a more conducive way. So I feel bad for him. It's on the heels of all this drama with him in WB, and then you see they recruit Coates, an elite black writer. So I feel for him. I'm always just like, what's the end game? When will he feel that he's been given his fair whatever, his due, So I'm just feeling for him.
Yeah, I do too. Like, I think it's tough because I totally agree with, like, I don't deny that Joss Whedon's Justice League set was probably quite toxic, and he probably had to deal with a lot of shit. It does sometimes feel like it's less systemic what he's talking about and more just personal. He got personal beef with Walter Hamada, but that's neither here nor there either. But it's not a good look for DC, because the other Superman project that came out this week, as I mentioned, Superman and Lois. Again, you guys are not as big Superman fans as I am, but I thought it was a great pilot. I love Smallville. Smallville was like formative for me back in the day 20 years ago. It's crazy that like 20 years to the date now, we have a new Superman show on TV.
Wow, holy crap! That's
Yeah, it's wild. And I thought it was, it was like the Superman movie I always wanted, the pilot episode at least. But at the same time, that show has some controversy because one of the writers on the show, Nadria Tucker, was unceremoniously fired from the staff back in November, and was live tweeting when the show came out this week, and basically saying and giving interviews and saying that like the writers' room was not very conducive to her ideas, especially around misogyny and racism. So, for example, the big twist in the end of the episode, spoilers if you haven't seen it, is that the big bad is Lex Luthor, but not the Lex Luthor that we've seen in the Arrowverse thus far. This is a black Lex Luthor.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
I think one of the arguments she had is that if you're going to have your main antagonist be a black man, you just have to be careful how you portray it, especially because the other antagonist in the show, for those of you who don't know, Superman Lois is about Superman and his kids. He's got 2 teenage sons, and one of the sons has powers and is in love with a girl who also has a boyfriend who doesn't like him, and that boyfriend is black. So like your the main antagonists for Superman and the main antagonist for Superman's son are 2 black men. So I think she's probably got, I kind of dread what the upcoming episodes are going to be like.
Who the hell wrote that?
Yeah.
Who wrote that shit in? Are you serious?
Like, and my thing is like, you're going to have like the intolerant boyfriend in a small town in Kansas be a black dude. Like,
also, if you land there, my man, you're going to inherit some like pretty backward. He's going to be like, has Clark not been rubbing up against some pretty backward, prejudicial, discriminatory, racist views and ideologies?
Because like one of the things in this show is that like Clark and Lois move back to Smallville, and Lana's there, and Lana's husband very much gives off like a MAGA vibe. Like, they kind of laud this Morgan Edge who's come to town to kind of rescue Smallville. And he's like very much a Donald Trump type character. And the way they talk about him, like there's definitely like a MAGA-esque, nature to like Lana's husband. And that's what I'm saying. It's just like, I don't know why you cast a black dude to play the jealous boyfriend while you also have a black Lex Luthor.
Oh my God, like doubling down. And
And the thing is, like, I've been calling for a black Lex Luthor in the Arrowverse for the last 5 years just because I wanted Leslie Odom Jr. to play Lex Luthor.
And then they listened to you, but at the wrong time.
Oh, so now you want a black Lex Luthor, but now there's black Lex Luthor.
No, but it's not the black Lex Luthor I wanted. I wanted Leslie Odom Jr.
Oh,
made a whole
thank
case.
God for multiverses.
Yeah, well, that's right.
What if Clark lands in, like, Afghanistan? What if Clark landed somewhere else?
That would have changed the whole deal.
Well, I mean, we had that was a whole Elseworlds comic about what if Clark landed in Soviet Russia.
Yeah.
Right, we have the Red Sun.
Okay.
But I want, like, what if he lands in, like, why that space? It just, wow.
But, I mean, I say this as an Asian American comics fan and who put together a couple anthologies of Asian American superheroes inspired by the Clark Kent story. When we did Secret Identities, Jeff Yang and I talked specifically about how, like, Gene Yang talks about this when he took over Superman for DC. The story of Kal-El very much dovetails with, like, Asian adoptee immigrant character, right? Like, he's got the dark hair, the thick glasses, who's got a hyphenated name from his, like, culture that he has to anglicize when he's in the real world.
Nice.
Like, all these things, like, so, like, a person of color playing Superman shouldn't be that big of a stretch. I mean, we had one. We don't claim him anymore, but Dean Cain was the first person of color to play Superman back in the 90s. It's too bad he turned into a MAGA jerk in his own
That
way.
is so, the irony, just, oh my gosh.
It's so upsetting that a Superman is such an asshole, but...
Well, I mean, I think part of it is the comics versus the visual representation. Because, I mean, I going on to your last point about the immigrant experience, I mean, let's not forget that, Superman, like most superheroes, was created by Jews back in the day.
Right.
And somewhere the subtext was, one of the reasons he's so overpowered was kind of the leap of imagination, was the one to have a person so overpowered as to be able to combat a massive white supremacist Nazi movement.
Right.
This was the sort of avatar they were seeking back in the day. And, this is similar to a lot of superhero origin stories. The problem is when you get to the guy that actually plays Superman, like in human physical form, you need some, like, beefcake that kind of, like, brings all these other associations with it. I think that's sort of where some confusion.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the one thing that I saw when there were inklings that MJ might be a girl of color, woman of color. or Spider-Man Homecoming.
Uh-huh.
This was like early before we saw a trailer or anything, and we were like, "Oh, is MJ going to be black or is what's going to happen?" And the one argument that stuck with me that someone used to counter that, and I'm going to remember this forever, is the person said, I don't like that at all, that they would make MJ a black girl, because what would happen if we took Martin Luther King Jr. and made him white on screen, right? Because like there's this such an asinine whataboutism that comes out from this kind of it stuck with me forever, and I'm just like, okay, so that's the response now, is these fictitious characters have become real in the lives of the people who listen to the dog whistle and come out and are like, a black Superman, what, whatever, someone else, a different identity, orientation, what?
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Like, I think, as a longtime fan in this space, I mean, one of the reasons we created the Nerds of Color back in the day was because if you were in any kind of like comic book forum, anytime if you imagine a white character as anything but white, you would get laughed out the room, right? Like, Nerds of Color came to fame, I think, just because I wrote a piece about why Danny Rand should be Asian American, right? Like, Asian American Iron Fist is what put Nerds of Color on the map. Not for a good thing either. It was because of all the fucking trolls that came out and was like, but Danny Rand is supposed to be white. Like, all of these characters are supposed
to be white, right? Like, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah, well, they are, because
what
they were
mean?
created in a time when white was the default. And then, like,
and they were the only ones in the room. Like, they were the only ones who had access and resources to get to that level to say, oh, hey, okay, I'm going to create a character and have the pull and have the resources to publish this shit. What are you talking about? Of course. But that's what happens when you can't decolonize your mind. And that's even at the level of, like, pop culture.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, it's all because whiteness is default. And then whiteness has the freedom to be whatever. The idea that a white guy goes to Asia to learn martial arts and becomes the greatest detective in the world is fine. You make that a non-white person and it's like too much of a stretch, right? Just because like whiteness is the default. And there's nothing intrinsically white about these characters, at least in the realm of these comic book characters. Whiteness is just default. Whiteness is the baseline. So you could make these characters anything. So that's the raison d'etre for Nerds of Color for all these years.
I really think Halle Berry's Catwoman will have its day.
Well, I think so too. I think so too. I think that's where we'll end it. Jamal, what's Nerd Poppin' for you this week?
And what's Nerd Poppin' for me? It is the 25th anniversary of Pokemon, and they've dropped so much really awesome news, really, really just exciting remakes and content that's coming out from the Pokemon Company and Nintendo, and I'm just ready to overindulge in that.
Dominic, what's Nerd Poppin' for you?
Well, it looks like they leaked a bit of a preview of the Marvel's upcoming Shang-Chi Legend of the Ten Rings movie in a picture of the Lego set box. Did you see this?
No, I didn't. And I'm a toy guy. I should have seen
Oh, yeah, no, this is pretty good. And as you know, the Lego universe is one of those places where everything ends up happy. So, what do you know about leaks from toy release
not always
artists?
reliable, but...
Not always reliable. Interestingly, someone got a picture of what looks like a Lego set from the Shang-Chi movie, showing him in a costume, showing some of the characters, showing a big white and red dragon, showing even like adorable little animal sidekick who's like a bat or a dragon or something.
Wait, are we sure this isn't Raya the Last Dragon Lego set that got leaked?
I mean, anything's possible in these days of photo fakery.
They thought it was Shang-Chi, but it really was Raya the Last Dragon.
Well, I mean, that went too deep on the conspiracy theory.
Not a conspiracy, just all look same to the whoever's leaking it on Instagram.
Yeah, we should explore that. We should talk about Raya and the Last Dragon as well. It's like, why is it always? But anyway.
But was it cool?
Well, I mean, there were just interesting things about it. I mean, for one thing, like it should be like a big deal, but like Shang-Chi is one of those characters that we weren't like super intrigued about the costume, because he's one of those characters who doesn't have a big costume presence. He's even one of those characters who like
wore shoes.
is sort of going just by his name. He doesn't even have, like Luke Cage or Jessica Jones, he's just going by like a version of his name. So there wasn't as much mystique involved as there would be if, say, like I'm really interested what the Moon Knight costume looks like. I'm really, but the interesting thing about Shang-Chi is his iconography is kind of that he's Chinese.
He's like Bruce Lee is his iconography.
Right, right. So we'll see how that plays out. And another interesting thing about that is like we should remember that Shang-Chi and the Eternals are going to be the first Marvel movies that come out in this phase to deal with characters that we haven't met before at all
Right.
in the universe. All the other characters are somewhat known quantities, and we're just elaborating on their stories. So there's a lot, I'd say there's a lot writing on that, because they have to do the world building.
I did see leak of concept art. I don't know if it's concept art. I think it was like illustrations for an upcoming calendar featuring the Eternals costumes. Did you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of the Eternals costume, and they look appropriately lush. I mean, contrast with Shang-Chi, the Eternals have tons of costume and, regalia going on. They have the most world to build of almost any set of Marvel characters. So that one's going to be super interesting. But anyway, we will see. What is Nerd Poppin with you?
So what's Nerd Poppin for me? We didn't get a chance to talk about this trailer because I know that, other than Jamal, we're not huge gamers on the Hard Knock Life podcast, but Warner Brothers released a red band trailer for Mortal Kombat, the movie, 2 weeks ago at this point. And the reason it's Nerd Poppin' this week is that it actually broke records. It's the most viewed, most downloaded red band trailer in the history of
Is that right?
all time, apparently.
That's fascinating.
And it's just kind of great that, Mortal Kombat, I mentioned Danny Rand. Louis Tan is playing a guy named Cole Young in Mortal Kombat. He was famously the actor who may or may not have been passed over for the role of Danny Rand in Iron Fist. But now he's playing the lead kind of audience avatar into the Mortal Kombat world. This brand new character named Cole Young in the Mortal Kombat movie. I think he's secretly Johnny Cage, which would be appropriate since Johnny Cage is the Danny Rand of the Mortal Kombat universe. So I think it's full circle for Louis Tan to play a version of Johnny Cage. But it's appropriately violent and grotesque, and Hiroyuki Sanada plays Scorpion. That alone should be enough to bring in butts to see this film in a theater or on HBO Max. Sub-Zero is played by Joe Taslim. It's got a lot of Asian and Asian American actors in the film, considering that there's not a lot of chatter on Asian Twitter about Mortal Kombat, but 95% of the cast is Asian American or Asian. So I'm very excited.
Do we think that as Asians we love finishing brutalities? Let's be fair. The selling point in that trailer is not the Asian presence.
No, it's the spine ripping. Yes, I understand.
It's Jax's arms get ripped off pretty quick. And
yeah. It's seeing Sub-Zero freeze Scorpion's blood and turn it into a dagger. That's what I think people are coming. But it's definitely it's up there with the Snake Eyes Storm Shadow. We just come for the ninjas aspect.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Because the Scorpion Sub-Zero plot, I'm sure, is all people give a shit about, and it's kind of dope to see actual martial artists performing their own stunts and stuff. So, but it's kind of cool that Mortal Kombat is the most downloaded trailer or red band trailer of all time. So it bodes well.
I'm sure.
For the movie.
Yeah, the Scorpion Sub-Zero thing is the best part, and of course using Asian in the most aggregate term possible. Should we also mention that Raya and the Last Dragon is coming out?
We should. I mean, all of the buzz so far on Twitter has been nothing but positive. And if you get a chance to watch it, maybe we'll talk about it next week. I know that it's available only via Disney Plus Premiere, which is the Mulan treatment where they make you pay for it on Disney Plus, which is interesting.
Yeah, can I just raise an issue there? Why is that just with the
Asian ones?
Asian content ones? Is it because we supposedly have the money to pay for it?
Yeah,
asking.
It's really weird. Mulan and Raya are the only two ones they ask you to pay extra for it.
Yeah, because for those of we might remember there's this concept of the China markets, which is a historical thing, and the history of globalism and empire. It's just the concept of China has so many people / Asia has so many freaking people, then if only we could figure out a way to sell something to every one of them, we would win capitalism.
Yeah.
Anyway, and again, we'll get into the disaggregation of East Asian and Southeast Asian later, which is because it's a huge issue.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, even with Raya, there's some all look sameism in the casting, I feel like, because one of the things about Raya is that it's supposed to be influenced by Southeast Asian cultures, but other than Kelly Marie Tran, everyone else in that movie is East Asian. So there's some issues there, I think, in terms of not all of Asia is the same either, but
yeah, and there definitely is an East Asian bias, but I do think it's interesting in a way. I think Southeast Asia is kind of aggregated in the way they frame it. I mean, whatever, Disney just blends and aggregates lots of different things. It's not
I'm just glad Rose Tico got some work post Last Jedi. That's
for sure.
That's all.
For sure.
That makes me happy. Dominic Ma, how can people get in touch with you on the internet?
Oh, I'm at Doma, DOMMAH, DOMMAH on Twitter or Instagram.
Jamal, how can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at XPROSPERE.
You can find me on Twitter at @TheRealChow, _real_chow. Follow the Nerds of Color at the Nerds of Color. Go to hardknockmedia.com to find this and all the podcasts in the Hard Knock Media family. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and youtube.com/Nerds of Color. Please give us a rating and review if you do. Support us on GoFundMe and on Patreon. Buy merchandise at TeePublic. And until next time, stay safe, everybody.
Y'all take care.
All right.
The hard knock life, comics, movies, and TV. Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the hard knock life, but not the chicken kind. More like the people in